Awesome. Thank you, Stephanie, for that virtual handoff. I'm going to consider it a baton just in the spirit of the Olympics. I happen to be a 4x1 follower. I'm going for Team USA, obviously. Happy and delighted to share the stage with these wonderful women today. My name is Shantae Davidson. I am the CEO of Better Together Brain Trust. We are an electrical contractor based in Boston, and happy to report that we recently won a contract with the city of Boston to install their city-owned EV curbside charging stations. That's a mouthful. So shoulder shimmy. Really grateful to Startup Boston for just being an incredible resource and helping connect the dots between entrepreneurs and investors and VCs and just everyone in between. Want to encourage you all to go check out their website or attend some of their events when you have time. And obviously, big shout out to the city of Boston. So that's a little bit about me and who I am. Definitely feel free to reach out. You can find me on LinkedIn. And before we hop into things today, I'd like to just kick it to my panelists. I'll kick it to Joy first. And Joy, please kick it to either Allison or Vic. Just tell us a little bit about yourself and some of your experience when it comes to considering hiring and then ultimately hiring and onboarding and managing your intern.
Hey, yeah, thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. My name is Claire Joy Moss. I go by Claire, and I am the Associate Director of Fellow Success in Boston at Hack Diversity. I'll talk a little bit about Hack and how that's related to my experience with interns. So Hack is a nonprofit organization where we break down barriers and increase access for the next generation in tech through a 9-month program cycle, which sounds a little scary, but it's definitely not, featuring a dual impact model that cultivates the talents of our stellar fellows and prepares them for an internship with our host companies throughout Boston and New York City. Before Hack, I've been in the career readiness space for a few years now. I worked in student employment and had a previous stint as a college career advisor at Berklee College of Music, and I was also an internship course teacher there. So I have worked with a lot of interns in my experience. You can feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn as well, learn more about Hack, hackdiversity.com, but I'm super excited to share the stage with some amazing folks this morning. So thank you for joining.
Awesome. And Claire, who would you like to kick it to?
I'll kick it to Vic.
Hello, all. My name is Vic Innocent. Thank you, Claire. Thank you, Shantae, and thank you, Allison, for having me. Also, obviously, the City of Boston and Startup Boston as well. I am the general partner of Frankenfield Ventures. We are a VC firm in Massachusetts. My experience with internships in the VC space actually comes from 3 different VCs. So my own, because I was lucky enough to prepare and coordinate a very special investor internship within the bounds of Frankenfield Ventures. And that one's focused on building investors, both who want to stay in venture capital as associates, as directors, but also who want to build their own VC firms and their own impact investment firms later on in life as well. Additionally, I am on the board of directors for Ares Capital, where we have individual interns. And lastly, and very specially, I'm also a venture partner at 1435 Capital. And I say very special because 1435 Capital, we have interns who are at high school age in venture capital, and they run their own firm. They run their own fund called the HRF Fund. So my experience with interns and internships and the creation of it comes from 3 different select categories. So I'm really excited to talk about this. I will give it to Allison.
The anchor.
Excellent. Thanks, Vic. All right. Well, hey, everyone. I am Allison Myrena. I am currently the VP of People at New Globe, which is not in the startup space. However, I do have many years of startup experience and many years working in an HR and recruiting capacity with interns and co-ops, both large companies and small companies. So most deeply entrenched where my full-time focus was specifically on university recruiting at Cengage, which is an ed tech company that focuses on predominantly digital products for university students. And so setting up that program was extremely meaningful since it was the core customer demographic, as well as, setting up their first nationwide internship program. And also, although not currently in a startup, for the past 5 years prior, I have been the head of people for 2 startups, one that I joined seed funded through Series A, and the other that was Series A through pre-IPO. So plenty of startup experience, plenty of intern, co-op, student recruiting experience, and excited to dive into everything with y'all today.
Fantastic. We have such rich and dynamic experience today. And so we will cover exclusively 2 questions. We'll try to understand when to consider bringing on an intern. And once you make the decision to bring on an intern or even a co-op, how to effectively manage and train them. So both the startup as well as the intern have a mutually beneficial experience. And so with that, I'm just going to hop into managing, and I'm going to ask Vic, you have really a range of experience within this internship, ecosystem, I'll call it. So what are some of the best practices for creating an effective management and feedback loop, just given especially the different life experiences, educational experiences with some of the folks that you're working with?
Yeah, fantastic. I would say one of the places that any organization should start with is understanding what you want done and where you want to go. This shouldn't be a haphazard avenue to be like, oh, I just need help. And just need help is too nebulous of a sentence. You need to figure out where you need the help, how long you need the help, in what capacity you have already started yourself with the help, and how you can divide and conquer that big tasks. So when it comes to startups, when it also comes to VCs, I like to say only look at the idea of getting an intern once you know the entire project, the full project. That project might evolve. In fact, it probably will evolve, because you should be wanting to incorporate the styles as well as the needs and demands of the intern, him or herself, because it is a learning experience and it is supposed to be a developmental experience for his or her career. So asterisk, big reminder, your internship is supposed to develop the career of someone else. It's not just going to be doing your project. It is specifically going to be a line on his or her resume that gets this person a job elsewhere. So take that into consideration. But anyway, that project that you're building, that you're thinking of, you can always start really generally. If you're the CEO, think of, what have I been lax about? What thing has been kind of limping along that hasn't gone through? And identify why it hasn't gone through. Is it funding? Is it lack of organization? Is it lack of resources? Is it lack of structure? I like to say lack of organization, because your task might be to say, we need to sell X number of ice creams by Q4. That's fine. But if you have no organizational structure, when you get an intern, nothing will actually be done. And this is not by the fault of the intern joining. It's because the project that the intern should have gotten is actually not to sell any of those ice creams. It's actually to create the internal structure by which that intern and other interns can get in and solve your problem. So step 1 is that scaffolding.
That's a really good point. And so I'm going to pivot to Allison, because when I think about an internship program, I often think about, is it best to have one intern or a suite of interns? How do you determine if a single intern or full internship program is something that should be modeled?
Yeah. So, I mean, ultimately, building off of what Vic was saying, right? Like, you're not going to hire somebody just to hire somebody. You have to think about, how can this be a developmental experience for them, in addition to what can my startup get out of this, right? And when you are a small and probably very lean team, and oftentimes not having a ton of management experience, not always, right? But startups do tend to see more junior managers or first, right? Do you actually have the bandwidth to have multiple interns? And moreover, zooming out, think about the why behind it, right? So why do we want to hire an intern? Okay, it's because we think that we could use an extra set of hands, bring new set of ideas to the table, and we don't have a ton of, cash to be able to pay this person. And so they are, typically more cost effective labor. But that amplifies obviously out when you are thinking about hiring multiple interns. In addition to the cost implications, you also have to think about that many more learning and development journeys and that many more people that you are having to support from a manager perspective, right? And these are students who are probably experiencing their first, like adulting real type job a lot of times. I don't think like the youth says that anymore, but back when I was that age, I said it. So I'll still say it.
Go for it. I can't keep up with the slang these days.
Geriatric millennial here. I can make fun of myself. But yeah, so ultimately, when you're thinking about hiring a suite of interns, there's just greater implications, right? And typically, when you're looking at having a whole suite of interns and having a broader program, you're usually doing this because you're thinking about a longer term talent pipeline to fuel a greater strategy of headcount growth. And when you're thinking about that, you should make sure that your headcount strategy involves hiring for entry level positions, which you might have in your company, depending upon, what your product or service offering is. But sometimes, like in my experience with, SaaS companies, at my last employer, we didn't find that we had a ton of availability of entry level jobs, especially when we were, Series A, right? We really needed to find more senior level engineers to actually begin writing the code. There weren't really many people who could actually develop student talent, whether that be a co-op or an intern. And so when you're looking at hiring, think about some of those implications of, what is the greater goal to this? And that will help you to determine, okay, do I want to go for just one intern versus do I want to develop a whole program? What is the long-term strategy and implication of this?
That's a great question. It's interesting because when Better Together decided we needed an intern, we really thought it was because, we're an echo chamber. We're all from the energy industry, and we really needed a fresh perspective and someone that could just, quite frankly, think outside the box. I don't know if that's, still in vogue to say it that way, or if there's a different way to put it. But, that's one of the reasons that we did it. Okay, cool. Thank you for that. And, one of the great things about being in community with women like you today is, just keeping relationships alive. I was able to connect with one of my dear friends, Sonali Anderson, and she had mentioned a woman named Michelle Goldberg who works at Suffolk University. Shout out to Suffolk and shout out to Michelle. And so Michelle had, informed me about their internship program, and it's got some really great benefits. In fact, during the actual academic year, Suffolk helps to fund these internships. And so, of course, I missed that boat because we didn't realize that we needed an internship until it had passed. But there are all these resources in the community. For example, there's Mass Tech Talent. So we would encourage y'all to go check that website out. And once I landed on my intern, his name, Kirtan, hope he's here. So shout out to you, Kirtan, if you are. I was able to take advantage of the SIPS program, which is a support internship program success initiative. It's managed and run by Brown the Green Space, but it's offered through the Mass CEC. And so that's another just nugget out there for folks that might be needing someone. And what's really great about that is it's an individual internship. So folks are placed at a variety of employers, but it really has this unique cohort experience that kind of talks a lot about what Allison mentioned in terms of some of the program and figuring out what you need in terms of where you're at in your evolution of hiring. And it's paired with different events where they meet in person and they network, and there are all these great resources. But it makes me think about Hack Diversity because I really feel like they have a really unique cohort model. So with that, I'm going to pivot to Claire, because in terms of the internship experience, interns typically expect an internship to have compensation, experience, or other future opportunities. And can you talk a little bit about some of the benefits that interns hope to get from their experience?
Yeah, thank you. So I think the biggest thing like we can start talking about is compensation. So before I started working in tech, I worked in music. And one of the biggest things like for a music internship, it was an unpaid internship. And one of the things that I always struggled with was an unpaid internship. It just seems very inequitable. Because there are a lot of interns with a lot of talent that may not be able to afford to work at a company if they're not getting paid. So what's happening is that you are missing out on amazing talent because of payment. And I know that it's difficult, like for resources to be able to pay interns, but they are employees. I think sometimes people forget that interns are employees. They have lives outside of their work. Some of them are students at Hack. We're education agnostic. So we have some folks that have families that they're like 45 years old, and they have other things. They have student loan debt that they need to pay off. So really to get the best intern that and to set them up for success really well is to be able to pay them. At Hack, we work with companies because we always want like market value compensation. So you don't want to underpay them either based on where they're coming from. Like you really do want to give a good compensation package. And they're working just as hard, sometimes harder. So it's always good to compensate. I think like as a general rule, and we've talked about this sort of in our pre-meeting, it's good to pay people. So I think that's always what interns are looking for. Experience-wise, I really try to talk to managers about not giving busy work. And I think Vic talked about that really well at the beginning. Interns want experience that is comparable to what they'd be getting in a full-time job, because this experience should really catapult them into the next chapter of their lives, whether it's at the internship company or not. So they need to get their hands dirty. They really need to start working on these projects. So, and I can talk about full-time opportunities, but so when they're ready to go to the next step, they have that experience under their belt and not just like taking notes for 3 months, right? Like, especially with our software engineers, like they need hands-on experience with coding. Like it's not setting them up for success. And like, as Allison talked about, right? Like these are pipelines, like we're trying to get more folks into the industry. So they do need that experience. And, I talk a lot about like, thinking about what else for the companies, what are you getting out of it, right? So as interns are working more on projects, collaborating with more people in your company, it's building a great community. So when that intern is thinking about their next step, or they're talking to their friend who needs an intern, they can say, hey, this is an amazing company because I was working on a project with someone who's a senior software engineer that I didn't think I'd be able to work on that. So like your reputation goes up, you're getting more people coming through the door, more applicants to your roles. So of course, building experience that way. And then the last thing I'll say on this is, we think that some interns are always looking for full-time opportunities. And in my work at Hack, there's definitely a lot of interns who are looking for those full-time opportunities after their internship. There are also some that want return offers or return internship for the next summer. And some just want to go back to school. Like they say, hey, I want this experience under my belt and I want to go back to school. I think the biggest thing with full-time opportunities, or if not a full-time opportunity, is being transparent with the interns and knowing what they want, not assuming what they want, really having that conversation of, hey, like, what are you looking to get out of this when it comes to the end of their internship? And if it is a full-time offer and that's not something that your company can provide, being upfront about that and saying, hey, like, we really love having you here. Unfortunately, we don't have the capacity to take you on as a full-time employee, but there's always ways to support an intern even if you can't convert them. So maybe you can connect them with a company that you know is hiring. Maybe you have some connections. Maybe you want to help set up some informational interviews. Maybe you want to offer to be a reference and look at their resume. So I would say a lot of interns that I've worked with do want that conversion, but because it's not feasible, you have to think about other ways that you are supporting those interns. And I think that is always the biggest thing, is like, how are you supporting that intern to get into their next step of their career? And just being honest as possible is what I think a lot of people want, but our interns definitely want that.
Yeah, for sure. Honesty certainly is the best policy. And so, with that in mind, I'm going to kick it over back to Vic, because even if folks aren't able to don't have the capacity to bring interns on, I'm wondering what metrics and indicators should we use to measure the success of an internship program. That way, when an intern or a co-op leaves, they can walk away with some real tangibles for results they've delivered or product that they've created and can go out into this world and really sell themselves for the next opportunity.
Yeah. When it comes to metrics, I'll dovetail on a little bit of what Claire just mentioned, that honesty policy. The honesty needs to start before the project, as in you're letting them know, hey, okay, we are unable to hire you at the end of this. The reason that sticks in many startups' throats is because they're afraid that someone would say no to them. But if you're afraid that someone would say no to them, then they should actually be saying no to that opportunity, because you're actively not giving them all of the information for them to be the best that they can be. I'll also touch back on what I said earlier about project development and creating the rubric and the skeleton of the full project before divvying out little parts or little bones of that project to each individual intern, or even to a slew or a cohort of interns. The reason I say that is because if you know where you're going, so to speak, for the project and the project development, and you know the capacity of what could be done in 12 weeks, in 16 weeks, in X number of weeks, then it is actually quite easy to figure out the metrics by which you would say this has been successful. If you start out knowing what needs to be done, then you can easily identify milestones. And those milestones, some of them will be financial, absolutely. Some of the milestones will be financial for the interns to be like, I need to make sure that I have gotten paid for this during this summer. That would be one milestone. But another milestone, I like what Allison had mentioned before. We want to make sure that this is cost effective, but that cost effective also refers to the amount of energy that the startup themselves are putting into the project. It's not just about cheap labor. It's not just about making sure that, oh, the interns got the experience to work with me. Working with you is not always going to be a great experience. These interns need to make sure that they will come out literally better than they had come into the experience with. So to do that, you as the person creating the internship, you need to put a lot of homework into it. You need to actually think about who is going to be the first in line to take up this project when the intern says, hey, this is actually too much of a pie. Or who's the first in line to say, there is more that can be done. Who is the first in line to decide what new bullets or subcategories can be created? You can decide that even before the project, to think, hey, I want 50% of this project to be created by you, the intern. And if you do that, in you're you're incorporating their goals into your project by default. Now, if you have a small project with a little bit of time, you may not be able to say, hey, 50% of this project is for you to be done. But the metrics, as I mentioned, is going to reveal themselves early on and not during, not in media res, because figuring out a metric in media res confuses everyone. It's unfair to the intern to not know where they are aiming at during the project. Additionally, I would say that goal, even though it can be very individual to the project, we do have the responsibility to showing the big picture. Back to the example of selling ice cream by Q4 or whatever, X number of units, you can divide and conquer that and say, hey, intern number one is doing this, and that is for vendor, for listing all the vendors. Intern B is making sure the contracts are done. Intern C is making sure that we have the resources to package all of the ice cream. It doesn't really matter. But in doing all of that, intern C, who's all about packaging, should still know what intern A is doing, should still know what intern B is doing, and should still know what why CEO has assigned A, B, and C to do all of these things. because it's really internally motivating to understand I am doing this for the greater picture. And again, that greater picture can be really, really messy if you don't figure out your project before the interns come in. It is a genuine disservice whether you have one intern or many interns if you yourself as a company are coming at this haphazardly as if you're just getting extra hands. That's not the goal.
I really like that. And Claire is so emphatic and her head nodding. And I'm wondering if she has anything to add in terms of feedback.
No, I think Vic covered it. You know, the biggest thing really is having a program set up. Like, don't just have your intern come in and you're like, you know, we're still figuring it out, you know, like, and I think with programs, like, it's okay if you are just starting an internship program and you have all these parameters set up and it's not the same as the internship program from Google. Like, if they're not going to be the same, and that's okay. You know, like we have worked with a lot of our fellows that come through the program. They see the list of host companies that Hackdiversity is working with, and we're kind of always assuming like, oh, they're going to want to work with Amazon. And there's some fellows that are like, no, I want to work at a small company because I want that experience. Like, I don't want to just be like the 500th intern that's the cog in the machine that doesn't know what intern A is doing, doesn't know what intern B is doing, and doesn't know what the CEO is doing. So even if you have like, it's your first internship program and you have those parameters and everything's set in place and it's not as flashy and beautiful or as like Google's is or whatever, or just like as a random company, it's okay. Like, you just have to have that intention and have an intentional program that you know your interns are going to be able to thrive on.
Yeah, I'll even interject and say one more thing, because I saw in the comment that sometimes it isn't clear for startups to know. I completely agree. You know, I have a VC firm, but I run it as a startup, as a little baby VC firm. So I get the idea that clarity is not always defined, but it is still our responsibility to create the skeleton. You cannot just go in haphazardly. You need to still have some rubric. That's why in the example I said earlier, there could be a scenario where you say, hey, 50% of this is thought out. The other 50% for you as my intern coming in is to figure out where else we can be going. Having that kind of ambiguity is absolutely fine. But just throwing them into the wind to be like, I need to do X, Y, and Z without any lead up, that's not going to get anyone anywhere. So we still need to do the homework to figure out, what do we as a startup need? What is possible and feasible for us to actually do? What is possible and feasible for us to dole out? And what is realistic? And that is like a tranched system. You'll figure out once you go through all of those steps.
Yeah. And I really love the thoughtfulness you put behind that skeleton. I have to be honest, I'm not sure that I was that thoughtful, but I did try to use the Stephen Covey principle of, you know, starting with the end in mind. And so that's kind of how we built it out. But it definitely gives me a cue for how to be more thoughtful, you know, our second round, because we certainly are starting to recruit for the fall. And then it just makes me think about setting expectations. And so that's where I'll pivot to Allison. Can you suggest a day of agenda for an intern's first day, first week, just to kind of make sure we set those clear expectations?
Yeah, and I did just want to comment on the last question before we move on to more of the onboarding piece too. And so, you know, even in a startup, I'm sure that founders have some idea of what they want to do in the next 12 weeks. You're not out here like necessarily setting hard and fast goals for all 12 months, but usually internships aren't that long. I mean, maybe in a co-op, they're, you know, a semester long. So like 4 or 5 months. So of course, those are going to be a bit longer. But going back to Vic's point of having that skeleton, one measure of success could be having a capstone project and having, you know, some moderate end goal in mind. And just like any other goal at a startup, it's going to shift and change throughout, right? The only constant that we have, not only in a startup, but any company, is change, right? So I think that's something to keep in mind, but definitely appreciate Luis's call out in the chat there. And I think the other part of that question too, and how it was worded, that was interesting to me, was that we were talking about, you know, how are you measuring success of the internship program? success for who? Success for you as the startup founder, or success for the student, right? So I think those could potentially be two different things, but they also could potentially be the same thing. And so by coming out of it, with something to add to their portfolio, like, some kind of project deliverable, particularly if they are a student that's, in UX or tech or whatever, even marketing, right? Like having that to build out their portfolio when they are going into their job search, especially if you cannot offer a full-time job after completion of, their program or graduation, is still really huge, right? And so now pivoting back to the current question of onboarding.
I love that you just went for it. I love it.
I have worked in the ed tech industry now for many years. New Globe is an education company. And I don't even think I shared of what we do and our interns. So we are working with governments in developing countries to bring technology and curriculum into public schools. So we are predominantly based throughout sub-Saharan Africa and India. So cool. And our interns are actually some of our earliest students who have since matriculated and now have come back saying like, hey, I'm in university. Is there any sort of internship work that I can be doing? And so it's really, really cool to see those students come full circle, because we're like an awkward teenager. We're 16 years old. And so it's cool to see that come around. But with onboarding, and I don't think you necessarily have to think about onboarding an intern versus an employee way differently, right? I approach it from how, universities thought would be a great idea, at least in the public, schools of Florida. I went to Florida State, go Noles, in that you have that core curriculum, right? You've got to take your math class. You've got to take your social studies. You've got to take your English. And so before you can actually get into your major, right, or the job you were hired to do, you should have some basic understanding of the other subject matter. And that's what I apply to onboarding at companies, right? So if an intern or an employee, anybody coming into your company doesn't understand what does the company do, how do you make money, like how does this thing work, it's going to be way less successful. And so taking a beat, and this doesn't have to be day one, it's probably something that you're spreading throughout the first week, right? Day one should probably be a little more chill, like a coffee chat with your new boss, right? Starting to learn a little bit more about the mission. If you have values, right? Those are great to bake in, making sure that they have access to systems, a laptop if you're providing one. Getting all of those nuts and bolts are very essential, because there's nothing more frustrating than not having access, even if you don't have an IT team. And especially if you have an HR team that you're making function like an IT team. Spoken like someone who has had that happen multiple times in startup. Make sure that those are set up, but then think about, okay, can I introduce this person to the person who is doing our business development and our revenue generation? Maybe that's the founder, maybe it's not, right? Or depending upon your size, like, do we have a marketing leader to talk about our go-to-market strategy? Do we have a operations leader who can talk more about the day-to-day? Help them get to know the other, bigger bucketed parts of how your company operates and works. And that will help them to know, okay, who can I go to for questions? So that way it's less of a burden on the direct manager themselves to answer all of the things, but also gives them the opportunity to have a stronger foundation to scaffold upon that skeleton that Vic was talking about before.
Yeah, I love that. And again, like there's a central theme there, which comes to relationships. And so, we all shouted out Startup Boston and City of Boston earlier. And so I'm inclined to go back to this question. What tips do you have for building relationships with local universities, such as those in Greater Boston, to create a pipeline for top tier talent and internship programs? Oh, and you know what? I'll go to Vic for that.
I wasn't sure who you were asking, so
I know.
I'm saying someone's name.
I saw you on the screen. You looked ready, so I said, let's talk.
I'm always ready. Okay, how about this? I will start with shouting out some places in particular. You already did a wonderful job. You mentioned Mass CEC, which, for Frankenbuild Ventures, we focus on hardware of clean tech. So Mass CEC is near and dear to my heart. Another really obvious and wonderful one to shout out is Hack Diversity. They create amazing people. Yeah, double double. Big fan of them. Oh, did you do one of those? I do those all the time. I was like, hello. For the internship that I created in my VC firm, we've actually, one university was Northeastern University. Big shout out to them. I worked with their engineering department in particular, and venture capital will often source people in engineering, but it comes later down in the line. We come from like, oh, did you go to IB, investment banking, and you have a quant background, rather than going to people who, well, they actually want to build a data delivery firm themselves, so they're not necessarily thinking of VC. That was perfect for me, because I'm like, hey, your project will use all of the world that you're using already in your master's degree, in your bachelor's degree, and you will now see a new lens for it. And the new lens of delivery is venture capital. So I worked with Northeastern University. I was also really lucky to work with Black VC and Latinx VC. And another shout out I will go to, Latinx is now called Sonos VC, but Black VC was one fantastic resource. They are like the equivalent of Hack Diversity, but specifically for venture capital. I would say Latinx VC is very similar to Black VC, but specific to Hispanic and Latinx persons. And then Venn Capital, which is very similar to Latinx VC and Black VC, but their lens is a specific focus on professionals who came from finance, who also have immigrant backgrounds. So I was very intentional about figuring out where to source. And shout out to Heather and her crew. I think they're in the chat, or at least were.
Heather Carpenter Oliveria, she's here.
Yes. Northeastern University. Yeah, fantastic. I also encourage people to directly just reach out to universities. Now, I say universities, but I will also point out, I went to lots of schools, lots of universities. I started out at a community college. Do not be afraid to look to your community colleges also for interns. As an example, I ended up working for NASA. I did my postdoc at Oxford University. I started out at Kingsborough Community College. If someone had gotten me as an intern back then, they would have gotten a superstar. But they would have just seen Kingsborough Community College. And many people don't necessarily think like, would this intern be of quote unquote BCG experience? Will this person be of X, Y, and Z? Well, if you nurture them with a good internship program, one that you thought of very well, then that will be a career development path for them. So shout out to all of those organizations: Black VC, Venn Capital, Latinx VC, Northeastern University, all university programs, Hack Diversity, Mass CEC, and community colleges.
You know what? You give everybody their flowers, and I'm here for that. And
flowers for all.
And they deserve it. I wanted to just pivot to Claire to see if Claire, if you had anything to add it, because I feel like your experience is just so rich and robust in the partnership community. So please, if you have anything you'd like to add.
Yeah, first of all, thanks for the shout out. You can email me at cmoss@hackdiversity.com if you want to know more. And I also want to emphasize the community college aspect. We love working with our community colleges. Bunker Hill, we always are like, we love Bunker Hill because there's amazing talent there. And like community college is such a great path to take. Like, so we are always like, yes, please, community colleges. Yeah, as someone who worked in a career center, if you are ever like I don't know where to start. There is usually someone who works at a college career center that's title is like employer relations or internship programs. Just email them, just be like, hey, like that's their whole job. Their whole job is to build these pipelines for their students. Those are usually their goals. Like every year, their F120 or FY something goal is usually a certain amount of interns to a certain amount of internships. And one thing that I will say is like, once you start to build those relationships, and you need to figure out, okay, so now I have an in with Suffolk University. Now I have an in with Bunker Hill. So what do I do next? You really want to, what we have seen work for Hack is we do a lot of the career fairs. We do info sessions. We try to have a presence on campus to reach those students where they are. I used to work in marketing, and for a while we used to just do like text, like emails that were like, hey, come talk to us. Students aren't reading emails anymore. Like you have to be in person. And when I say in person, I mean like you can do a virtual info session, but you need to get in front of the students so they can hear you, they can see you. And a lot of colleges, a lot of institutions are very happy to have you come visit and do an info session. And when I say info sessions, they can be very much like, this is what our company is. This is what our internship program looks like. One of the things that we have had a success with is we do application info sessions where we actually go in and help students do their application for Hack Diversity. So like you're actually getting insider information. We have alumni panels too at some of the schools, which they're happy. So we have Bunker Hill folks that went through the program and we'll say, hey, can you come sit in? And the other thing, and I know we're running out of time, but I do want to add, we also, since we're education agnostic, we work with boot camps. And there is such an amazing source of talent in these boot camps and people who are working really, really hard for non-traditional educational pathways, if that's what you want to call them. And sometimes with the boot camps, because there's not like especially if it's like an earlier or even a certification program, they don't have those traditional like career center or like alumni resources. So it does take like a little bit of time to nurture those relationships. Like I just got off a call with someone, I think a couple weeks ago, who was like, I am in a good space in my certification program. Now I want to build a pipeline with you all. And he even said to me, like, this is going to take some time. Like we need to work on this partnership and nurture this partnership. And I have a couple other calls with other boot camps too, to really get those folks into the door. So if you know a boot camp is 6 months and they will have the skills, because skills based is coming up rather than education, they have the skills, then how can you really get those folks in the door as well? So don't sleep on boot camps and certification programs because they have amazing talent. So really, I think the tip is having patience and being innovative with the boot camps too. That's a big one because they might not have the structures of the traditional career center. So you can be like a little more creative and a little more fun too. So I would say those are some things to do.
Awesome. I think Allison's there she goes.
Yep. Here I am. So, absolute huge +1 to boot camps. I will say I'm biased. I am married to a General Assembly grad who made his own pivot out of high-end Spanish tile sales into UX during the pandemic. So yeah, exactly. And now, diversifying companies throughout Boston that he works for. So boot camps, it is, totally changed our life. And his joy at work. He loves being UX. But moreover, I think another piece to boot camps too is you can also consider boot camp grads. I don't know why that was so hard. Just for your entry level jobs, they don't necessarily have to be interns. But two things. So one, also love the community college thing. The other piece too that Vic touched on briefly towards the start that I don't want us to forget about is also folks coming out of high schools, right? So Europe also has a really phenomenal program that works with those, predominantly from, underprivileged backgrounds who've maybe only completed a high school level of education. And honestly, one of the best women who has ever joined my team was a Europe grad with no, boot camp or college degree, even at a community college level. And she was always, I just loved it. She'd come to me and she'd be like, Allison, I need a coachable moment. I need a coaching moment. Like, how would you approach this? And I was just like, oh my gosh, yes, let's do this. Let's talk through it.
Relationships, love it.
Yes, she's phenomenal. 10 out of 10, recommend. So don't sleep on your up. They're really great. And then the other thing that I wanted to call out, we've talked about how amazing Northeastern's co-op program is, and plus one to that as well. Worked very heavily with them at Cengage. But also Wentworth has a co-op program too. So don't sleep on them. Really great tech talent coming out of there. But I know when I was getting my start in university recruiting that the term co-op was something that was totally foreign and new to me. And so just in case we have any founders or whomever may be a hiring manager of a student on this call, I just wanted to pause and say that a co-op is the exact same thing as an intern, but typically on a longer, more semester basis, right, in terms of duration. And so it's, if you hear the term co-op, don't be confused. It's just like an internship essentially, but with a different title. And hopefully I have not completely butchered that definition. Heather from Northeastern, feel free to fact check in the chat. But those are just a couple of things I want to call out.
No, that's great. And like, we love when folks are interactive, especially in a virtual environment. And Heather's put her 2 cents in a couple of times. So we certainly thank you, Heather. And we encourage that. In fact, we're opening it up to questions, which we were supposed to do 7 minutes ago. We only have a couple of questions. And so I'll just add some flair to the boot camps. And so boot camps are great because you can do them at through the evolution of your career track. And so I did a boot camp as an intern. And before I became an entrepreneur, again, just to plug Brian, the Green Space, I participated in their Access program, which is the Contractors of Color for Sustainable Success. And it's a 10-week program for aspiring entrepreneurs to help you, just get your business in order so that you can actually launch. And then, fun fact, they're actively hiring for their next cohort, which is slated to begin in September. You get great mentorship, and there's even a financial stipend at the end, which helped me, quite frankly, jump into entrepreneurship, gave me some financial stability to do that. And then I love what Debbie Hayes had to say in the chat earlier. And Vic mentioned this a bit about soft skills. So soft skills are so important. And I think maybe even Claire and even Allison alluded to it just being a skills-based world. And I do love that Debbie also mentioned that in-person can be so valuable. We love being here. It's virtual. We can, cast a wide net, and many people can be on this call, but especially during the internship experience, at least for me and throughout my career, I think being in person was super, super duper important. Looks like we really only have one question in the chat. It's from a friend of mine, Stephen Miller. He owns a company called Lab Renew, and he'll be bringing on interns in the next year or so. And he's asking, what is the dollar an hour per day? So I'll go take a stab at that. So for the program that I'm using, the SIPS program, again, that's administered through Brian the Green Space via Mass CEC, it's $18 an hour. We elected to chose to pay our intern more because he happens to be a grad student, and we wanted to make sure we paid as livable a wage as possible based on what our projections would allow us to pay. So is there anyone in the chat that would like to take that question on in terms of what a good dollar per hour or daily rate is? Allison?
Sure. It really just depends on the type of talent you're hiring, right? So, I mean, like if you're hiring an intern from an MBA program, typically they will be expecting a higher pay rate, right? So that's one thing to consider. But also too, just like when you are hiring for any position, right? Oftentimes in Boston, software engineers might command a higher salary than somebody in a more operational, like customer success type capacity. I can't give an accurate read on what folks currently pay in the Boston area for these roles, since all of our interns are based in Africa, which has very different currencies. But if you need to know, what we pay in Rwandan francs, I can get back to you.
Thank you for that. And we actually do have another question. So thank you, Madeline. We'd love to hear more about effective strategies for feedback for interns. Would anyone like to jump in? Claire?
Oh, yes, this is my favorite question. I absolutely love talking about feedback because I used to hate feedback. So it was a very transformational for me. Where I've worked in the past, feedback was not fun. So The biggest thing for feedback is like, I think people are sometimes afraid to give feedback, but it's a disservice to not give feedback. And one of the things that we do at Hack specifically, like for our employees, we all write like a little employee manual about ourselves and talk about how we like to receive feedback. So where there gets to be like some sort of like clash is if you like feedback a certain way and you're not getting it that way. So in your first day, right, you can have that conversation with an intern like, hey, how do you like receiving feedback? Because and I think the other thing too is like feedback sometimes is just thought of like the negatives. But one of the things that we do at Hack is in our meetings, we always have a glows and grows section where you just are constantly giving feedback to each other. And one of the things you're doing is telling them the great things that they've been doing too, being like, hey, this is something that I've really seen you doing and showing up. And one of the best things about glows is if you gave someone a grow earlier and now that grow has turned into a glow. So I think just like being honest and telling and giving that feedback, having it built in structurally. And then like one quick anecdote. So like I said, I used to hate feedback. I love feedback now, but at the beginning I was like, I take it personally. I understand. Like, and you know, and when I first started, I went from managing one person to 3 people. And the biggest thing for me is I was like, I'm afraid to give feedback because I know I don't like getting feedback. But so I was essentially projecting how I feel about feedback, but not everyone feels that way. So like one of my employees, I don't know if he's here today, but like I had to give him feedback one time and I was like sweating because I know how I take feedback. Like I was like, let me do the sandwich method. Like, let me do it. And I was like, you know, this is blah, blah, blah. And he was like, oh, great. Thank you so much. I'll work on it. And that was it. Like some people want conversations. Some people like want to really dig into the feedback and go back and forth. But I think what makes a really great feedback conversation is knowing how both parties communicate, knowing what both parties want out of that, and to also continue and like follow up on that feedback later too. If it's giving a grow, like, are you also give like progress essentially on that? So feedback becomes more of a conversation and like isn't so scary anymore to take the scariness out of feedback, but always giving feedback. It's very much a gift and like presenting it that way rather than these are all the things that you're doing wrong.
That's good feedback. That's good feedback. And I always have trouble doing anything virtual because like I'm a double Dutcher. So I can't tell if Allison's going to come into the rope or if Vic had her hand up. So Allison.
No, I've got it for the steal. Boom. Anyway. So I will also double down on not only the feedback, that communication style is incredibly important for management in general. One thing that I like to do that I've learned from one of my advisors is for every single new project, and of course this is time dependent and resource dependent, but for every new project, I would say, okay, is this a project where I am going to lead and you just learn from the back, where you and I are going to split it all together, or you lead and I'm coaching you from the sidelines? What do you feel like doing for this kind of a project? Because someone might be really excellent at certain things and then given a new project, they feel, actually, I want to have more of a background on this and learn so that the next time this type of project comes in, I can be the lead. So do not be afraid of having that conversation. Literally the 3 solutions, like, am I doing this and you're my right-hand person? Are we splitting it, just divide and conquer? Or is this something you want to start and try on your own? And I will just tell you, oh, this is where you can improve. This is what you should be doing, da, 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 da. Because it changes the dynamic of how someone wants to see that project be done.
Awesome. Allison?
Yes, I did just want to share 2 quick things about feedback. So actually, I attended an HR conference back in March, and this company called Tandem that focuses on performance management did this entire study all about feedback. And they said that 69% of folks would feel more productive if they felt appreciated, to the point of the glows that, Claire brought up. And 60% of employees want feedback daily or weekly, which increases to 72% for employees under the age of 30. So
Wow.
your typical intern demographic. So I did want to share that really quickly. And an easy metaphor, I think that particularly managers, at least in my experience, tend to lean more on the glows than the grows, right? Just texting what someone oftentimes managers are afraid to give that constructive criticism. But the way that I've, presented this to my team, and it's really resonated, is that exclusively giving praise can be like giving someone a piece of candy. It tastes really good, but it doesn't have a ton of long-term nutritional value. And so ultimately you can get those nutrients by giving specific critical feedback and not blurry critical feedback. So if you say, Shantae, that presentation was just bad, you're not going to know what about the presentation was bad. You're going to have more questions, right? Like, what am I supposed to do to improve? Whereas if I say, Shantae, in your last presentation, you spoke the entire time, didn't save any room for questions, and it was more of like a monologue than a discussion and a thought process, right? That is much more specific, and you know what you might need to change there.
Well, I want to say thank you to Angel. I just saw your question in the chat, so I didn't see it in the Q&A, so I'm going to have to bypass that. We've had such a good time in community. I love that we could be ourselves, and you can really see our personality shining bright. Thank you to Startup Boston and Stephanie. I'm going to pivot to Shanice from City of Boston because we're in a time crunch because we had such rich